I apologize for that. This, I guess, going to have to be a two-part video because I had somebody pull up in the yard and interrupt me. I did not mean to stop there. Um, but I think I was on a rambling tangent anyway, so it's just as well that I was stopped. But what I was trying to get to was why you would be making the shield. Now, I mentioned there's reasons, SCA, reenactment, or whatever. If you're part of a group that has specific guidelines on what to build, by all means use mine as a basis, but go with their guidelines. Don't, well, I saw this internet guy, he said you can use this shield. No, I didn't. I didn't say you could use this shield for whatever the fuck you do. I said these shields work for me. I use them for sparring, light sparring with foam weapons, which doesn't require anything, or with wooden weapons, and occasionally with blunted steel weapons. I use a blunted steel spear that has yet to do any significant damage except for a gash that runs along here, but it just doesn't look like it shows up. But I do repaint it, and one thing about this particular shield is this red is the color of the canvas, and I've actually found that helps kind of maintain its appearance. So if you're going with a dominant color, like if I had found canvas that was this color, this one is all painted, it probably would preserve it better. But in the future, this one's probably going to be decorative, do like a cross motif on it and whatnot. But anyway, I'm rambling. So if you have a specific group that you're part of, you need to follow their guidelines. But by and large, I think this design, if I'm mistaken, let me know. It would work for SCA. I think they have like a certain strap arrangement that's required, but that's easily modifiable with this style. But if you're going for more reenactment, or as I like to think of it, first-person wargaming, you're dressing in period clothes, you're wearing period armor, you're using period shields, and you're using period weapons, and you're doing combat with somebody else, mind you, with blunted weapons, rounded spear points. I wish I had my spear with me, because it has no real bevel to the edge of the blade portion, and then it's comes out to a small mushroom tip at the end, so it can't pierce. But that's the type of weapons I'd be talking about that I personally have found that these shields work for. So if you're using wooden weapons, or not doing life or death combat, I imagine these should work fine under life or death combat. I'm not going to try that. You're more than welcome to. Let me know how it turns out in the comments. But if you're going to look for a historical style, by and large, my method of construction will be a historical style. And as I mentioned in the other videos, there are certain things that I just don't do for historical. Historical things I don't do for functional reasons. Excuse me. One being, this one actually has them underneath, because I never meant on this one I never meant for it to be adjusted on a regular basis, but the rest of them I have the facings of the machine screws out at the outside, so you can use them, because if you're going to be doing a little bit of sparring with just foam weapons, you want to practice certain techniques or work on your guards and your stances, and all you need is the weight of it. You're not going to be wearing a gambeson necessarily. You're probably not going to be wearing your full armor every time you do that. So having a strap that can adjust to the thickness of your arm in armor, or in your full fighting rig, versus your practice setup, I found it to be incredibly helpful. So after I made this one, all of my shields were made with that in mind, because I want to be able to use them multifunctional. And thinking about it in the future, I think I will start making at least a practice shield for me that allows me to switch both from a right-handed grip to a left-handed grip, so I can work out both sides. But that also would not be historical, but that's a compromise I make. Another compromise I make that is not historical is I do use plywood. I mentioned this in my initial video. What we know about most historical plywood, I think there's very few instances where it's 3-ply, which being the thickest I am aware of, up until like the Industrial Revolution, when you could regularly sandwich 3, 4, 5-ply, but it's going to be stronger than taking planks and linking them together. That sandwiched across the grain, what's the word I'm freaking looking for? Reinforcement across the grain, reinforcement. How it has strength in multiple directions. You get a lot less just splitting. You get a lot more splintering and flaking when they do break, but they would actually be stronger, if only slightly, than a historical shield. But keep in mind, shields were made to be disposable. Some were made not to be disposable, as being decorative shields, and those tend to be the ones that have the more elegant paint job. Those are usually the ones that we find with the steel rim or being a steel heater shield, which there's a lot of debate on whether or not those were ever used in combat. I'm of the belief that they weren't. I think the wood shield is better, but I've never used a full-sized metal heater shield. It'd also be very expensive. Why would you use essentially a breastplate's worth of metal on a shield when you could just use wood? And it works just as good. I didn't mean to make that rhyme, but another aspect of wood that's very helpful is weapons get stuck in the edge, and you're not going to have that with the metal. One thing I also don't do is I don't do a whole lot of work with getting a curve to the shield. I just have not made a press. This one, it's really hard to tell, but this one has a slight curve, and all I did is place it in a very steamy room with weights on the side and a beam down the middle of it to kind of compress that and get that curve. But it didn't really take, primarily because it's an incredibly thick shield. This one I think is half inch. But as far as historical context, this is going to be more your 12th, 13th century, although the strap arrangement is debatable. This one is going to be probably 9th to 11th century again. This is more an experimental handle arrangement, and I think I'm going to change this to be, rather than that post, because I just happen to have that hardware and I wanted to see how it worked, see how it felt. Do a bolted in piece like that one. It's hard to tell because most of the shaping is actually inside, but you get the flat back, and then you get kind of a contoured grip so it doesn't rotate in your hand. But like I said, this one would be more of a 9th to 11th century. This one's going to be more 11th, 13th century. And shields of this style, the big long shield, tended to be still used by infantry. It's a myth that, as plate mail became more common, they just stopped using shields. Not everyone could afford plate mail. The standard infantryman was still using a shield. It was still his cheapest and most reliable defense. And the big long shields, despite what some people might claim, I don't feel that they're good cavalry shields. I don't feel that they were designed as cavalry shields, because you see both infantry and cavalry using that same shield. And I think it's Shad on his channel, Shad Reversity, if I'm saying that correctly. It's not a real word, so forgive me if I fuck it up. But he does a very good demonstration on why just the arrangement of having the big bulky shield does not work when you try and defend the other way. There's a horse head right there that I'd be constantly whacking with the point of the shield, which is why I think the heater was the next evolution, because this style ended up kind of extending out and making a more shallow curve, which eventually also meant that the bottom shortened up and the top flattened a little bit more, and you have the heater style, some with kind of a more point, some with more rounded, some came to a more of a point down here and were less rounded on the side, but I like this shape more, mostly for aesthetic reasons. But extending down would be inconvenient. This is much more convenient to use on a horse. It's lighter and more flexible. And the same thing could be said for round shields, where Romans would use an oval-shaped shield, but it had a center grip, so you could at least turn it and rotate it over, which is why I think that, again, that there was no direct evidence saying that a center grip in the kite shape was specifically used, but we do see the kite shape used contemporarily in artwork with the round shield, and also we have historical shields from a period that we also again have artwork saying there was this shape, but from Scandinavian finds we found round shields. We found round shields dating from the same era, so they were used during the same time, and I feel it would have been a matter of personal choice as to how you wanted to grip your shield to some extent. Also, what was available and what influences you had. So I did make this one with the intention of it being a Saxon shield for my Saxon impression, which that'll be another video. But summing up really is the shapes evolved. I might make. I've thought a lot about making a that transitional shield between these two. Not necessarily as a kite, maybe, but or at least the big droplet shaped kite. Maybe with a more triangular shape to it, and kind of a shallower point to the bottom, a little bit more of a curve, and then a softer curve to the top. And as I said in that other video, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it because it's a French word, and the French have this bad habit of adding vowels and sounds to words that aren't there when you look at it in a English context. But gauge for it's what it is that strap I described, and that's what that is hanging off of. That would come at from about here and come out and allow you to rest that weight, and then you have up in this corner up here you'd have that handle, and so it'd give you that kind of pivot point. So all you have to do is bend that elbow, and you'd have that full length of the shield be able to come out. And I personally speculate that it was more appropriate for not someone pulled up again. I thought it would be more appropriate for formation fighting, where these kind of big shields become heavy, and you want that supported weight, but you also want that flexibility and maneuverability. Although there are plenty of pictures and evidence of knights using it too, so you could question that. But in most of those pictures, they are using it on foot, at least the ones that I've seen. By the late medieval period and into the Renaissance shields, at least for the mounted knights, tended to get smaller and smaller, but the shapes remain the same. The techniques for constructing them remain similar. They tended to have more of a curve, especially when they were used for knights, for tournaments, so that way they kind of covered the whole body. And the idea really was you move it minimally to get it in position, not you're up here and doing this thing. And that's Hollywood. That's stagecraft. That's not real fighting. In the historical treatises on at least buckler combat, because we don't have anything I'm aware of that really gives detail on how to use a heater shield or a kite shield or whatever. Most of them are sword and buckler, but it doesn't have you using these broad, flashy movements. It's simple. It's simple. Come in for the blow. Come in for the blow, or like the I-33 or 133, called the Tower Manuscript or Valpurgis Manuscript, whatever you want to call it. You should probably be familiar with it or get familiar with it if you are interested in medieval weapons and medieval shields, because it's the oldest manual, at least in the West, that tells how to use a shield, and it uses a buckler. A little bit smaller than this, but it has it using in tandem with a sword. You're using the sword in the right hand, and you're always covering it with that buckler to protect that hand, because that's always going to be right there, coming at an angle from your opponent, or down like that if they try to strike from below, or binding from beneath. But I think once I've got a few more shields, once I've got that project shield I mentioned with the alternate strapping, I'll probably do a video just on that. And if you are curious as to why I have 4 shields that essentially match, I'm going to do that in a separate video, but it has something to do with my new company that I began at the beginning of the year, called War Eagle Game Design. And part of War Eagle Game Design is something I just mentioned, and that would be first-person wargaming, where you take on the equipment, weapons, armor, footwear, clothing, costume of a specific warrior from period, and you would learn the not just the individual fighting skill necessarily, but fight in formation, fight in ranks, and do at least skirmish level combat with other groups of people who have also trained and practiced in the same formation and drill fighting as well. But that's another video. If I interested you with that little tease, go ahead and watch that video too. But again, I've rambled on enough, and if you've watched both part 1 and part 2 and you've got to this point, thank you very much. Like my video, you may as well. It's almost over. Thanks for watching.